to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where you can let your day loosen its grip and drift toward rest. Tonight you'll be carried into Honeycomb Dreams, a slow golden journey through a lantern-lit meadow and a hidden hive where warmth, wonder, and peace gently gather. Settle yourself into a position that feels easy. Let your shoulders drop as if they're remembering how to be soft. Feel the weight of your body supported beneath you, held without effort. If your jaw is tight, allow it to unhook. If your hands are tense, let your fingers uncurl, one by one, like petals opening in the dark. Breathe in slowly, as though you're breathing in quiet, and breathe out slowly, as though you're releasing the last little knots of the day. In and out. Unhurried. There is nothing you need to solve right now, nothing you need to plan. Your only task is to rest. Imagine a gentle evening air brushing your skin, cool enough to feel fresh, warm enough to feel kind. Somewhere nearby, a soft hush of grasses moving like sleepy waves. The sky is deepening into velvet blues, and the first stars are beginning to appear, one at a time, as if they too are taking slow breaths. With each exhale, you can let yourself sink a little deeper. With each inhale, you can invite a little more calm. And as you listen, you may find that the story begins to carry you, the way a slow river carries a leaf, without effort, without urgency, towards sleep. And now, as your breathing finds its own gentle rhythm, the point of view shifts as if the mind is setting down a heavy bundle and stepping back. The evening continues on its own, and the dream can unfold with quiet ease. In a meadow that seemed to exist halfway between waking and dreaming, twilight lingered longer than it did anywhere else. The light did not hurry away. It stayed to stroke the tops of wild grasses, to paint the stems of flowers with faint gold, to warm the smooth backs of stones that had been sunlit all day. At the meadow's edge stood a small cottage, not grand or sharp-lined, but round-shouldered and friendly, as if it had been built by someone who believed comfort was a kind of magic. Its roof was thatched with reed and soft moss, and near the chimney a patch of honey-colored lichen glowed faintly, like embers that had learned to rest without going out. A narrow path of flat stones led away from the cottage and into the tall grass. Some of the stones were pale as moonlight, others darker, as if they carried a little shadow within them. Along the path, tiny white flowers opened in the dim, releasing a mild, sweet fragrance. It was the sort of scent that didn't demand attention, only offered itself like a lullaby. Inside the cottage, a simple lantern burned with a steady flame. A kettle sat on the stove, quiet and warm. On a small table by the window, a bowl of honey waited, thick and golden, catching the lantern's light and holding it. Beside the bowl lay a wooden spoon and a folded cloth, embroidered with an old pattern. Hexagons stitched in a honeycomb, each one slightly different. each one patiently made. The one who lived there moved slowly, as if time were not something to chase. Her name, if it could be called a name, was Maren. She was a keeper of calm things, a listener to soft sounds, a friend to bees and breezes. Her hair was the color of wheat just before harvest, and it fell in a loose braid down her back. Her eyes were the gentle brown of warm tea. Maren had been waiting for this particular evening, not with anxious anticipation, but with a quiet readiness, like a porch light left on for someone arriving late. She had spent the day tending to small tasks that soothed the mind, sweeping the floor in slow, thoughtful strokes, hanging herbs to dry, rinsing jars and setting them in the last of the sun. And now, in twilight, she listened for the sound she loved most. Not the sound of wind, though she loved that. Not the sound of water, though she loved that too. The sound she waited for was a soft, layered hum, so delicate at first it could be mistaken for imagination. A few beats of silence passed, and then it came. A tiny vibration in the air, a shimmer of sound, like a living thread being pulled through the evening. Maren smiled. She opened the cottage door and stepped outside. The meadow greeted her with cool sweetness. The sky had turned deeper, and the stars looked more awake. A thin crescent moon hung like a silver petal. Fireflies drifted in the distance, small floating lanterns, their light blinking in gentle conversation. And there, above the path of stones, bees hovered in a small cluster. They were not frantic. They did not dart wildly. Their wings moved in a calm rhythm, making a hum that felt like a soft purr. These were not ordinary bees, though they resembled them. Striped bodies, shining wings, tiny legs dusted with pollen. Their eyes held a faint glimmer, as if they had looked into something luminous and carried it back. They were the dream bees, and they arrived only on certain nights, when the meadow's air grew thick with drowsy magic. Maren lifted her hand slowly, palm open, and the bees drifted closer, respectful and unafraid. One bee landed lightly on her finger, weightless as a whisper. It turned its head as if greeting her. "Welcome," Maren murmured. Her voice was low and smooth, like a blanket being pulled up. The bee's wings flickered once, and then it lifted off again, returning to the hovering cluster. The group moved in a gentle spiral, as if guiding her attention toward the far side of the meadow. Maren followed them along the stone path. Her steps were quiet. The grass brushed her ankles with feathery softness. The air smelled of damp earth, crushed mint, and something sweeter, like warm sugar dissolving. As she walked, the meadow began to change. Not abruptly, not in a way that would startle. It changed the way dreams change, one detail shifting while another softens until the world feels both familiar and new. The flowers grew taller, their petals widening like cups. The fireflies became more numerous, their light steadier, as if they had decided to linger. The sound of the bees' hum deepened, becoming layered, one note beneath another like a chord forming in the dark. Ahead, the path curved toward a grove of trees. They were old trees with broad trunks and leaves that shimmered faintly, even without wind. The grove was not dense or threatening. It felt like a sheltered room made of branches and night. At the grove's center stood a hollow oak, wide enough for a person to step inside. Its opening was smooth, as if polished by time and gentle hands. Above the opening, carved into the wood, was a pattern of hexagons, honeycomb shapes, interlocking perfectly. The bees hovered near the hollow, and Maren understood. This was the place the dream bees used to enter the hive that was not quite in the waking world. She stepped closer. The oak's hollow breathed cool air, scented with honey and wildflower nectar. The smell was comforting in a deep, ancient way, like a memory of warmth. Maren placed her hand on the oak's edge. The wood felt alive, not in a startling way, but in a steady way, like a slow heartbeat. The bees' hum wrapped around her, and the air seemed to soften. She leaned forward, and the world gently folded. It was like stepping through a curtain made of quiet. One moment she was in the grove under starlight, and the next she stood in a corridor of amber glow. The corridor was made of honeycomb. Hexagonal cells rose on either side, stacked and repeating, each one holding a faint light inside. The walls were not sticky or sharp. They were smooth, warm, and softly luminous, like golden glass. The air was mild and sweet, and the hum of wings echoed gently, a constant lull. The corridor stretched ahead, curving slightly, inviting without urgency. Maren walked forward, her footsteps making no sound, as if the honeycomb floor cushioned them. As she moved, she noticed that each cell held something different. Some cells held tiny pools of honey that shimmered with captured light. Some held pale wax that looked like sleeping clouds. Some held flowers, small, preserved blossoms that still seemed fresh, their colors softened like watercolor. Some held little fragments of dreams, a feather that sparkled with moonlight, a ribbon of mist, a single note of music held in the shape of a spiral. The dream bees drifted around her, guiding her deeper. Their wings made a sound like gentle rain on leaves. At the corridor's end, it opened into a wide chamber, so wide it felt like a cathedral made of honeycomb geometry. The ceiling arched high, and every surface was patterned in hexagons. The chamber glowed from within, a warm amber that seemed to breathe. In the center stood a great honeycomb structure, larger than a tree, with layers and terraces like a golden mountain. Bees moved across it in slow streams, not frantic, not chaotic. They were purposeful, the calmest way, like a well-rehearsed dance. Maren stood still for a moment, letting the atmosphere settle around her. Here, everything felt quieter than quiet. Even the hum was softened like sound wrapped in cotton. A figure approached from the honeycomb terraces. She was tall, and her robe shimmered like wax in candlelight. Her hair was dark and glossy, pinned back with a comb carved from amber. Her eyes were the pale gold of morning honey, and her expression held patient kindness. This was the hive tender, a being who existed in the borderland between nature and dream. Some called her the queen, but she did did not rule in the way rulers did. She guided, tended, listened. She was a keeper of sweetness, a guardian of rest. Maren, the hive tender said, her voice low and melodic. It did not echo sharply, it flowed. Maren bowed her head slightly. The dream bees arrived. They always do, the hive tender replied, and her lips curved into a faint smile. When the world grows heavy, they gather what is soft. When minds grow tired, they weave what is gentle. She gestured toward the great honeycomb structure. Come, the honeycomb is ready. Maren walked alongside her. As they approached the terraces, Maren noticed small openings in the honeycomb, doorways that led into deeper layers. Each opening had a faint scent drifting out. Lavender, chamomile, pine, warm bread, rain on soil, comfort scents, sleep scents. What will be made tonight? Maren asked. The hive tender's gaze drifted upward as if she were listening to something far away. Dreams that taste like safety, she said softly. Dreams that feel like home. Dreams that remind the tired ones they are held. They stepped onto a terrace. The honeycomb beneath their feet was firm yet yielding, like a mattress of warm wax. Bees moved around them, brushing past without collision, their movements smooth and considerate. On the terrace stood basins carved from amber. Each basin held a different substance, nectar that glowed faintly, pollen like golden dust, and honey so clear it looked like liquid sunlight. Nearby there were comb tools, thin wooden shapes that resembled spoons and combs, and small spatulas, all smooth and worn with use. Maren's hands itched with a familiar tenderness. She loved this work, not because it was difficult, but because it was soothing. Each movement was slow and deliberate. Each action had a gentle purpose. The hive tender placed her hand over one basin of nectar. This is meadow nectar, she said, collected from flowers that bloom only at dusk. It carries the memory of evening peace. She moved to another basin where pollen shimmered like tiny stars. This is moon pollen, she continued, gathered from night blossoms. It carries calmness and quiet. Then she turned to the honey, the clearest of all. And this, she said, is dream honey. Maren looked closely. Within the honey, faint shapes moved like reflections. A slow river, a sleeping cat, the curve of a hill under mist, a lantern swinging in a gentle hand. The honey seemed to hold softness itself. How do we begin? Maren asked. The hive tender lifted one of the comb tools, dipping it into the meadow nectar. She drew it out slowly, letting a ribbon of nectar fall back into the basin in a silky thread. We begin the way sleep begins, she said, slowly, with a sense of safety. Maren chose her own tool and dipped it into the moon pollen. The dust clung lightly to the wood, sparkling. Together they moved to an empty honeycomb wall nearby. Its cells were clean and ready, open hexagons waiting to be filled. The hive tender began first, spreading a thin layer of meadow nectar into each cell. Her movements were steady, unhurried. The nectar caught the chamber's amber light and held it. Maren followed with the moon pollen, sprinkling a tiny amount into each cell. The pollen sank into the nectar and made it glow more deeply. As they worked, the bees' hum shifted subtly, becoming even softer, as if the hive itself were relaxing. "What happens to the dreams once they're made?" Maren asked quietly, though she felt she already knew. "They travel," the hive tender said. "The dream bees carry them out into the world. They find those who need them. They brush the dreams across tired foreheads. They leave sweetness on the edges of thoughts." Maren's tool made slow circles in a cell, smoothing the mixture. The texture looked like thick light. They continued filling cell after cell, moving along the honeycomb wall like a slow tide. The work was repetitive, and that repetition was soothing. Every cell was a small promise, rest. Every gentle motion was an invitation, soften. As they worked, Maren noticed something unusual. In one of the empty cells, there was already a faint shadow of a shape, like a small scene waiting to be revealed. She leaned closer. The shape looked like a tiny doorway, a little arch, a path beyond it. The hive tender noticed her pause. "Ah," she said softly, "a honeycomb dream is forming." Maren's breath slowed further. "What kind?" "A dream that opens," the hive tender replied. "A dream that leads someone gently inward into deep rest." The hive tender lifted a small vial from a shelf, amber glass filled with honey darker than the dream honey, like honey gathered from wild forest flowers. She held it up to the light, and within it, faint flecks glimmered. "Forest honey," she murmured. "It carries mystery, but not fear. The kind of mystery that makes the mind curious for a moment and then content." She uncorked the vial and let a single drop fall into the cell with the doorway shape. The drop landed silently, and the shape clarified. The arch became more detailed, outlined in warm glow. Beyond it, a hint of a winding tunnel appeared. Maren felt the atmosphere shift. Not in alarm, but in deepening, like a lullaby moving into a lower key. The hive tender turned to Maren. "This honeycomb dream will need a guide," she said. "Someone to walk its path and make it gentle." Maren understood. She had done this before, though not often. When a dream formed with an opening, it meant someone far away was on the edge of sleep, uncertain and restless. The dream needed to be welcoming, to offer a route into rest. Maren placed her tool down carefully. "I will go," she said. The hive tender nodded, placing a hand lightly on Maren's shoulder. The touch was warm, grounding. "Remember," she said, "nothing must be forced. A dream is not a door to shove open. It is a window left ajar." Maren approached the honeycomb wall. The cell with the arch now glowed brighter, as if inviting. She leaned in. The air around the cell thickened with sweetness. The hum of the hive softened until it felt like a distant purr. Maren's eyelids grew heavy, not with sleep, but with dream sense. a gentle shifting of awareness. She stepped forward. The arch expanded, becoming large enough for her to pass through. She crossed the threshold, and the honeycomb chamber melted away behind her, like a candle's last warmth. On the other side was a tunnel made of waxy gold. The tunnel's walls were formed of repeating hexagons, each one lit from within by soft amber light. The floor was smooth and warm beneath her feet. The air smelled of honey and night flowers. The tunnel curved gently, leading downward as if into the earth, but without any sense of heaviness. It felt like moving into a cozy blanket, layer by layer. As Maren walked, she heard a faint sound ahead. Not a threat, not a cry, but a restless kind of sigh. The sound of a mind that hadn't yet remembered how to let go. She slowed her steps even more. She let her shoulders relax. She breathed in the warm air and allowed the scent to settle in her chest. At the tunnel's end, it opened into a small room. The room was made entirely of honeycomb, but softer than the hive's cathedral chamber. Here, the hexagons were rounded at the edges like pillows. The light was dimmer, more intimate. In the room's center was a shallow bowl filled with honey that glowed like a small hearth. Beside the bowl lay a figure, blurred at first like a sketch, not fully inked. The figure was not fully present because it was not Maren's dream alone. It belonged to someone else, someone drifting on the edge of sleep. The figure's outline rose and fell with breathing. The breaths were a little uneven, as if the sleeper carried leftover thoughts. Maren knelt near the glowing bowl, careful not to startle the dream. She dipped her fingertips into the honey's surface. It was warm and thick and calming. With the gentlest motion, she traced a small circle of honey in the air above the figure's head, like drawing a halo made of sweetness. The honey did not drip. It hung in the air as a shimmering ring, then dissolved into a faint golden mist. The figure's breathing eased slightly. Maren listened. The restless sigh became quieter. The room's light softened. She dipped her fingertips again and traced another circle, this one wider, like ripples spreading in still water. The honey mist drifted down over the figure's shoulders, sinking into the dream like warmth, soaking into fabric. The breathing slowed. Maren leaned closer and spoke softly, not words to the waking mind, but to the dreaming one. "You are safe," her voice seemed to say, though it was barely more than the hive's hum. "You are held. You can rest." The figure shifted, as if settling into a more comfortable position. Maren smiled gently. This was how Honeycomb Dreams worked. They did not battle thoughts or chase away worries. They simply offered another sensation, warmth, sweetness, quiet, until the mind chose to lean into it. She looked around the room and noticed honeycomb openings along the walls, small doorways leading into other dream spaces. Each doorway pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Each one was an option, a path the dream could take. Maren stood and approached the nearest doorway. Its scent was of warm bread and butter, cozy, domestic, A dream of a kitchen, perhaps, with slow morning light. The next doorway smelled like rain on pine needles. A forest dream where droplets gathered on leaves and fell in slow rhythm. Another smelled of lavender and clean linen, like fresh sheets. Maren returned to the glowing bowl in the center. She dipped her hands again, then slowly lifted them. Threads of honey stretched between her fingers, like golden silk. She held them up, and the honey threads shimmered. With careful hands, she began weaving the threads through the air, connecting the honeycomb doorways with gentle arcs. The arcs formed a path like a slow constellation. The path did not force direction. It simply suggested a flow and easy sequence. First warmth, then nature, then softness. As she wove, the honey threads hummed faintly. The sound was soothing like a low chord on a harp. The figure beside the bowl seemed to respond. Their outline became clearer, more settled. The restless energy drained away like water, finding its lowest point. Maren continued weaving until the honey arcs formed a complete, gentle loop around the room. The loop glowed softly, a protective ring. Now the dream had shape. It had structure, not rigid but supportive, like the frame of a cozy nest. Maren knelt again near the figure and watched their breathing. It was slow now even. The face was still indistinct, because in honeycomb dreams the sleeper did not need to see themselves. They only needed to feel. Maren placed her palm lightly on the honeycomb floor. She could feel a pulse beneath it, the heartbeat of the dream itself, synced with the sleeper's breathing. The room grew quieter. The glowing bowl dimmed slightly, like a fire settling into embers. The honey arcs softened, their light turning from bright gold to a calm amber. Maren knew what came next. In honeycomb dreams, once the sleeper was calm, the dream would open into a deeper layer, one where the mind could drift without images, without stories, into pure rest. The honeycomb structure was a bridge, not a destination. She stood and looked at the figure one last time. The sleeper was peaceful now, floating in the honeycomb room like a child held by warm blankets. The restless sigh was gone. Maren stepped back toward the archway she had entered. As she moved, the room's light followed her gently, then receded. At the threshold, she paused and turned. She lifted her hand in a small farewell gesture, not dramatic, simply kind. The honeycomb room responded by softening further. The edges blurred, the glow dimmed. The dream was slipping into its deepest phase. Maren stepped through the arch. The tunnel welcomed her back, and she walked upward this time, though it did not feel like effort. The honeycomb walls glowed faintly, as if pleased. The air tasted sweet. As she approached the other side, the hum of the great hive returned, soft, layered, comforting. She emerged into the cathedral chamber of honeycomb and found the hive tender waiting, as if she had never moved. The hive tender studied Maren's face. "It is done," she said quietly, not a question. Maren nodded. "The dream has settled. she replied. Like honey in a jar. The hive tender's eyes warmed. Good. Then the dream bees can carry it. Around them, bees gathered in slow spirals. Some dipped into the basins, some brushed against the newly filled honeycomb cells. Their legs collected tiny flecks of dream sweetness. Their wings lifted softly. Maren watched as the bees began to move toward a honeycomb opening high in the chamber wall, an exit that led back to the meadow and then into the wider world. They will find the sleepers, Maren murmured. They always do, the hive tender said again, and this time her voice felt like the final line of a lullaby. They are gentle messengers. Maren felt a pleasant heaviness behind her eyes. Not fatigue exactly, but the kind of drowsiness that comes from warm work and safe places. She let her shoulders soften further. The hive tender guided her back along the corridor, past honeycomb cells holding tiny dream fragments. As they walked, Maren noticed that some cells seemed to glow more softly than before, as if they too were drifting towards sleep. When they reached the corridor's end, the oak doorway shimmered ahead. The scent of meadow air drifted through, cool and fresh. Maren stepped through. She was back in the grove under the stars. The air was cooler here, and the fireflies blinked gently. The meadow's grasses whispered. The dream bees hovered near the oak, then streamed out into the open air like a ribbon of living gold. They rose above the trees, their hum fading into the night. Maren watched until they were only a suggestion in the darkness. Then she walked back along the stone path toward her cottage. Each step felt slower than the last, in the best way. The night seemed to cradle her. Inside, the lantern still glowed. The kettle was warm. The bowl of honey on the table caught the light and held it, quiet and patient. Maren poured herself a small cup of herbal tea and added a spoonful of honey. The honey slid in thick ribbons, dissolving slowly. She stirred in unhurried circles, listening to the gentle clink of spoon against cup. She carried the tea to the window and sat in a chair that had been worn smooth by restful evenings. Outside, the meadow lay under starlight. The grass moved faintly. Somewhere, an owl called once, softly, and then returned to silence. Maren sipped her tea. Warmth spread through her, settling in her chest like a small, kind flame. As she sat, she imagined the dream bees traveling. She imagined them drifting over rooftops, over forests, over rivers that shone like dark silk. She imagined them finding open windows, slipping through curtains and hovering above sleeping faces. She imagined them brushing honeycomb dreams into tired minds, leaving behind softness. The thought made the whole world feel gentler. Maren's eyelids grew heavier. The lantern's flame seemed to blur, turning into a warm halo. The room's corners softened. Even the air felt like it had slowed. She set her cup down and stood, moving as if she were already half asleep. She climbed into her bed, which was piled with quilts that smelled faintly of sun and lavender. She pulled them up around her and let her body sink into the mattress. Outside, the meadow continued its slow night breathing. Inside, the cottage held stillness. Maren exhaled. The exhale seemed to carry away the last remaining threads of wakefulness. In her mind, she saw the honeycomb corridor again, golden, warm, repeating. She saw the cells filled with dream honey, each one a tiny lantern. She heard the hum, soft as a purr. The image did not sharpen. It did not demand attention. It simply floated, soothing. The lantern light in the cottage dimmed slightly, as if it too were sleepy. Maren's thoughts became fewer, like leaves drifting down in slow motion, like snow settling on quiet ground. The meadow outside was a dark blanket sprinkled with stars. The bees were somewhere far off doing their gentle work. The honeycomb dreams were spreading, one soft cell at a time across the world. Breathing slowed, heartbeat steadied. The cottage seemed to rock in the hush, not moving but comforting like a cradle. And now the story itself begins to quiet. The images soften. The honeycomb glow fades to a warm ember. The hum becomes a distant comfort. Everything grows simple. A slow inhale, a slow exhale, a sense of being held, a sense of warmth, a sense of sweet stillness. The meadow sleeps. The hive sleeps. Maren sleeps, and you can sleep too, drifting down through honeyed quiet, down through layers of softness, into the deepest rest. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.